So good morning to you, St. Mark's. Good morning. You know, I consider it an honor and a privilege to be able to stand here with you guys before God to deliver His word. It's a blessing to be in this position right now, and I'm so thankful that Deborah called me and asked me if I would be willing to stand in, because of course, you know, I don't get too many opportunities to preach, so, you know, needless to say, I jumped at the opportunity to get up here this morning. So as you just heard our scripture today from Matthew 9 through 13, this was primarily covering the call of Matthew to follow Jesus. And so while this is a pretty straightforward subject matter, you know, it's the call of Matthew, you know, what else do you need to know about it? I want to look at this from a little bit of a different viewpoint. I want to look at the calling of Matthew in terms of reputation versus mission. So to get this started, as I'm studying and preparing for this and praying over this, I said, okay, well, hold on. Do I know what the textbook definition of a reputation is? So, of course, I went to the dictionary, and Webster defines reputation as the overall quality or character as seen or judged by people in general, or recognition by other people of some characteristic or ability. Okay, so I had my basis point here. So as we reflected on the opening chapters of Matthew last week, we saw Jesus as the authoritative teacher. And we closed with the story of the centurion in chapter 8, verses 5 through 13. The centurion was a man in and under authority who recognized the authority that Jesus held. And seeing that, he had also called on Jesus to heal his servant. It was the faith of the centurion that led him to do that. But as we continue to move on through chapter 8, we see a series of miracles and healings performed by Jesus. In verses 14 through 16, you see where Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. In verses 28 through 34, upon reaching the Gerasenes, Jesus casts out the demons that are in the two Gerasene demoniacs. And also, on the way to the Gerasenes, in verses 23 through 27, we have the miracle of Jesus calming the winds of the storm as they were on the waters. So all of these events, all of these miracles that just happened, these are all components that go into the building of the reputation of Jesus among the local people in the region of Galilee. So as we enter into chapter 9, we start off with yet another healing, but this one is just a bit different from the other ones. In this particular healing, Jesus forgives a paralyzed man's sins prior to healing him. This has us in verses 1 through 8. And so upon doing this, the teachers of the law, the religious elite, the Pharisees, they claimed blasphemy because they didn't recognize who Jesus was at this point. It's blasphemous because Jesus was, quote unquote, usurping the power and right that only God had to forgive sins. They didn't recognize that. So seeing all this going on right now, what can we say about the reputation of Jesus up to this point? We know he's a teacher, he's authoritative, he's a healer, he's compassionate, and he has the ability to forgive sins. So in general, we can say that, you know, just from the outside looking in, there's no reason to dislike Jesus. There's no reason to have any issues with him. But what does this have to do with the calling of Matthew? So as we look in verses 9 through 13, the actual call to Matthew, we see as Jesus is walking through the street with his followers behind him, he passes the tax collector's booth in Capernaum, where Matthew was stationed. See, Matthew was sitting here collecting goods on material coming between the ports of Damascus and the Mediterranean. But what do we know about Matthew? Matthew, as a tax collector, what were the tax collectors? They were the most despised individuals in the area. They were the lowest of the low. They were the worst sinners. And to a point, you can call Matthew an extortionist, a traitor, because here he is, a local Jewish man who has sided with the Roman government to excise a tax on his fellow brothers and sisters. Not to mention, he made a pretty comfortable living doing it, because as he collected for the Roman government, he also got a little extra for himself. So in this particular role, he had money, He had power. He was influential within his circle, even though his circle was not the most reputable circle of the local population. But when Jesus came by and called him, Matthew immediately followed. Matthew left everything behind to follow Jesus. He left the power. He left the money. He left the influence. Now, of course, as you look at this, you know that the reputation of Jesus preceded him. Matthew had probably heard Jesus preach before, heard his teachings, and was nonetheless familiar with who Jesus was. So what did Matthew do immediately following? He accepts the call, but upon accepting the call, he also invites Jesus and his disciples over for dinner at his house. But he also invites his circle of influence, which were the tax collectors, the disreputable people, the lowest of the low, the other sinners from the town. And so, as Jesus accepts this invitation and they break bread together, the Pharisees, who have already noticed Jesus and expressed their displeasure with him, at this point, they're looking for any way to detract from his sterling reputation. So they approach the disciples and ask, well, why is your teacher eating with these sinners, these disreputable people? And you know, Jesus could have easily allowed the disciples to answer that question for him. But Jesus chose to answer it himself. And we see that answer in verses 12 through 13. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Okay, so at this point, we have the reputation of Jesus, a great reputation, healer, teacher, authoritative. We have the reputation of Matthew and his circle of friends, negative reputation, sinners, lowest of the low. But after all of this, how do we circle back to what we want to talk about today? How do we circle back to reputation versus mission? For that, you have to understand the mission. So what was the mission of Jesus when he was here? Well, in a nutshell, his mission was to reconcile sinners, the least, the last, and the lost, into a saving relationship with God the Father through himself. Or you can just go to Luke 19:10 and seek and save the lost. Keeps it in a nice little package right there for you. So everything that we've covered through his teachings and miracles between chapters 8 and 9 were all components that when pulled together, form a basis for the reputation of Jesus among the common man at that time. But however, when we look at the fact that the religious elite, the Pharisees, wanted to drag him down, they thought that they had him at that dinner. They thought they had their moment right then when he was eating with those sinners, because he wasn't eating with the people he was supposed to be eating with. He wasn't conversing with the people he was supposed to converse with. But they missed one key element. They didn't know his mission. The mission that Jesus had, or that Jesus was here for, carried more weight than his perceived reputation in the eyes of the corrupt religious elite. In other words, he didn't care what they thought. He had a mission to fulfill. And he came to reconcile all of us to a saving relationship with God. Not just the elite, or not just those who thought they were righteous, but he was here to reconcile all of us. So the calling of Matthew was a sign to all of the outcasts, all of the downtrodden, the least, the last, and the lost, those whose society said that they were not good enough to partake in the kingdom. This was a sign to all of them that if they would be willing to follow Jesus, to answer that calling just as Matthew did, that they too had a place. And that's why Matthew brought all of his friends and all of his circle over, because these were all the sinners. These were all the ones that Jesus came to save. These were the ones that he wanted to be in front of. So the question that I have for you right now is, what does your reputation say about you? See, this is that brief moment of self-reflection when the wheels start turning. You know, following Christ, it's not an easy walk. Just as Pastor Deborah pointed out last week, if you're looking for the way and you see a huge group of people running in one direction, you probably want to go in the opposite direction because the road is narrow and the gate is small for where we're going. And with the many different social pressures and political correctness that bombard us day in and day out, it becomes harder and harder to find that path that we're supposed to walk. The only way that we are able to find that path is through an ever-deepening relationship with God the Father through Jesus Christ. In his response, where Jesus says, "But go and learn what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice," in verse 13, that's a reference to the Old Testament, to Hosea 6:6. And in that verse, God says, "I want you to show mercy." Some translations will say love, not offer sacrifices. "I want you to know me more than I want burnt offerings." So what does that tell you? God wants a relationship with each and every one of us, not just a surfacey relationship that you have when you come in here, but a relationship out there. He wants to know each of you on a deep level. And you know, this is why the faith community and the bonds that you form within this sanctuary right here, within your fellowship hall, this is why these bonds are so vitally important. Not only do you sharpen one another when you come together, whether it's here on Sunday or in the fellowship hall, but you're also a source of strength for one another as we take this journey. Like I said, it's not an easy walk. You know, I was fortunate enough to be here last week and witness y'all adding a new member. And if I remember correctly, it was the community, the family feel that led to the decision to join. This is what brings us together. It's God that holds us together. But it's the community day in and day out that have to lift each other up. Whenever one of you falters, whenever one of you falls, it happens. But it's that community that's going to reach that hand out and say, "Come on, brother. Come on, sister. I got you. We're going to make this walk together. We're in this together." It's that focus that we have. And you know, as we think about being in a community together and the struggle that comes with following Christ, this isn't anything new. This is nothing new. It's been around since the beginning of the church. Peter struggled in the Passion narrative. You can find that in Matthew 26, 69 through 75. In the courtyard of Caiaphas, he denied Christ 3 times. It was social pressure that caused him to deny Christ 3 times. Or maybe in the infancy of the church when we see Peter again in Galatia, in Galatians 2, 11 through 13. He would eat with the Gentiles, the uncircumcised. But when the friends of James came up from Jerusalem, he refused to eat with them anymore. How many of you have had that moment when you have that air of hypocrisy where you're trying to preach one thing but you do the other? You don't have to raise your hand, but it happens. Sometimes knowingly it happens, sometimes unknowingly it happens, but it does. Is your reputation bigger than your mission? So at this point, some of you are probably asking, what is my mission? What is the mission statement of? I'm talking about something bigger. I'm talking about the Great Commission that we have in Matthew 28, verses 19 through 20, the whole Great Commission. "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you to the end of the age." You're not making this journey alone. You have a source of strength and power with you greater than you could ever imagine. You have a community with you that's walking with you day in and day out that will take you. When you fall, they're right there with you. I mentioned earlier there was a brief moment of self-reflection when we talked about your reputation. Through my time of preparation for this message and through prayer, I found myself in a position of self-reflection. Is my reputation bigger than my mission? There was a day when I look back at my old self and I say, man, I wanted to be the tough guy, I wanted to be that guy that hung out on the beach all Saturday, drinking and partying and doing whatever with no ill side effects. I was that angry guy that worked at a frustrating job that was filled with stress. And rather than looking up for help, I hate to say it, but I'm that guy that went out into the scrapyard and took my frustrations out on the old water heater. I'm calling it what it is. That was me. I probably didn't even know what a reputation was at that point. But when I look back on it, man, what an ugly reputation that was. It was negative. There was nothing pretty about it. But as I stand here before you today, I'm a new man, working with something so much better. Because just as Jesus put his reputation on the line to reach his hand out to Matthew, who had the negative reputation, who was a sinner, Jesus put his hand out and reached out for me. He said, Brad, you're going the wrong direction. I got a better way for you. I'm going to show you the way that you need to go. Quit following the crowd. Go this way where nobody's going. Follow the narrow path. Layer by layer, he tore me down. All the negativity, all the stress, all the anger, he tore it away layer by layer and started building me back up. It's been so good. It has been so good. You know what? And I ask the question again. Is my reputation bigger than my mission? No. No, it isn't. If it was, I wouldn't share that information with you. I have a story to share. And I'm willing to share it with anybody who's willing to listen. I want to brag about what God has done in my life. I want to tell you about the peace that I have inside me. I want to tell you about the joy. I want to tell you about the freedom that I have since I decided to follow Christ. I want to tell you all these things because as I get excited and I feel that spirit welling up within me, I want you to be excited. I want you to experience that same thing. How selfish of me would that be to not be willing to share my story, my experience with somebody who may need to hear it? I don't know who needs to hear it, but somebody does. And my reputation will not hinder me from following through on the mission that God has laid before me. And as I look at the cover of your bulletin, and I see the little kid with his arms wide open looking out at the field, and I just think about that. As God is working in my life and I'm on mission, I have endless opportunities. There are so many different people that are out there that he wants me to talk to, that he wants me to reach out to. I have endless possibilities. But when I let my reputation get in the way, when that takes precedence over the mission, I box myself in. I become tied down by chains, by restraints. Thankfully, I'm not tied down anymore. I have freedom in him. So, similar to Peter, does your social network prevent you from reaching out to those in a different class, different age group, different ethnicity? Are you willing to make yourself vulnerable if you want to have that reputation of being a tough guy? Can you be vulnerable for somebody who needs to find Christ? Or is your reputation bigger? As you're sitting here week in and week out, you are being equipped in here on Sundays to get out there and follow through on the mission. Is there anything in your reputation that you're going to allow hinder you from the mission that's out there.